Hello, and welcome to Health and Fitness Redefined. I'm your host, Anthony Amen. Join me today as we take a dive into the world of health and fitness, where we learn how to overcome adversity, to pick fact versus fiction, and see health and fitness in a whole new light. Guys, we will start back up those quick tip episodes momentarily. I did not forget. It's just been an absolutely crazy couple of months. For those that may or may not know, the spring season for gyms is just chaotic. So it's all good, but we are back in action and we got the perfect episode for you guys today. Before I introduce today's guest, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how important this topic is to me. In our wellness packets that we give everyone when they sign up for our club, the number one piece of advice is get more sleep. Not number two, the number one. And not only is the number one piece, it is in bold, all capitalized letters. That's how important sleep is for the body and how much I personally believe it's a topic that needs to be discussed. So I believe I got the perfect guest for you guys. So without further ado, let's welcome to the show, Erik. Erik, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on today.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I appreciate you having me here to talk about one of my favorite subjects, sleep.
Something people don't get enough of.
No, they do not. My background, I worked in elite sport for quite a long time in the NFL and college football. And, you have all these, when you're at that level, people have everything at their disposal for recovery, right? Like they got saunas and cold plunges and this and that and the other. But at the end of the day, the number one recovery tool the body has is sleep. And we still aren't great at leveraging this biological tool that's at our disposal to improve physical and mental performance.
No, not at all. Even those that I feel like are studied in it still struggle in trying to make it work. But let's talk a little bit more about your background. What got you into this in the first place?
Yeah, so I spent about 16 years, like I said, working in college and pro football. I started as a strength and conditioning coach. Had the amazing opportunity in 2005 to start working with world-class sprinters, specifically Jamaican and American sprinters in the 200, 100, and 200 meter events. Some of them ended up being Olympic gold medalists. And I had the opportunity.
Is that Usain Bolt? Can I just throw that in there?
Huh?
Was it Usain Bolt, one of them?
Tyson Gay, who set the American
Nice.
100 meter record. Veronica Campbell Brown, she's a Jamaican. She won 8 Olympic medals, 3 golds. Aileen Bailey, who was an Olympic gold medalist from Jamaica. That was a crazy experience. Jamaica is a whole nother animal. And, I got to travel the world and see how the rest of the world was training and developing their athletes. And I noticed that in America, we had a problem, and that we had too many good athletes. And because of that, we hadn't really developed a science for how we were developing our athletes. Other countries had these institutes of sport. They literally had government funding going into how they could combine biomechanics, physiology, psychology, all the components to improve performance. So I was like on a mission to bring that to the US. And in 2011, I had that opportunity. I was at Florida State University, brand new head football coach, Jimbo Fisher, taking over for a legend, Bobby Bowden. And Coach Fisher let me be the first American sports scientist. And I went to Australia and brought back athlete tracking technology that ended up changing sports as we know it in the U.S. Any game you see now, you're going to see athletes being tracked and monitored, and they're showing their stats of how fast they're moving, AWS next-gen stats. So my career just took off. Had a really unique opportunity to do some fun stuff. But I got really fascinated by this concept where no matter if it was an elite sprinter or an elite football player, I saw one commonality between them, and that was they were incredibly adaptable to mental and physical stress. And we could actually measure this in their brain in some other ways. And I wanted to understand, could we bring that capability to anybody? So I got a PhD, and I wanted to know how sleep impacted our ability to adapt to stress. And so that's what got me down the sleep pathway.
Yeah, that's an amazing story, by the way, just being able to travel the world and just seeing how different countries are functioning for the Olympics, because there's someone like me that just sits at home and just watches it. You don't realize what goes into it.
It's crazy. It's a lot of time and effort, and most of these folks don't really make very much money. There's government sporting bodies. There's a lot of national pride. Like, I'll never forget my first world championships in Finland for track. And it was like 60,000 people in a stadium while somebody's throwing a shot put. Here in the US, you'd have to get like a pro baseball game to get that. But that was like, it's that big in different parts of the world. They really value these sports that are kind of ancillary in the US.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love that. So let's talk a little bit about what you saw related with athletes and how much sleep they got. Because I know you said that was one of your biggest points of studies for as far as stress goes.
Yeah.
So I have to feel the nervousness, energy, the stress that leads up to an event, especially the night before. Like I stress before I go away on vacation. I'm like, I can't sleep today. I'm so wired. So like, I couldn't imagine getting in front of millions of people and having one opportunity to walk away with gold. So what does it look like on the back end of that for prepping them for such an event?
Yeah, I mean, it's, the night before you should expect not to sleep, or, have disturbed sleep, unless you're just Michael Jordan and you're just cool as a cucumber. But it's really weeks and months that lead up to you're filling your tank. And, you mentioned stress. A lot of people, especially now post-pandemic, there's been a spotlight on stress and how stress is debilitating and all this kind of stuff. And that's not the truth. Stress is actually the gateway to growth. It's not the enemy. The problem is when stress exceeds your capacity to adapt from like an acute standpoint, or this long-term low-grade fever of stress. That is when people end up getting physically hurt, or they end up having mental health issues. Think about it, like, you own a gym. The only way to get fit is to do what? Exercise.
Stress your body.
Yeah, it's stress, right? If you want to learn a new skill like podcasting, you have to stress yourself to create plastic changes in your brain. So what is the interaction of sleep on this? Well, sleep, Thomas Dekker was a British dramatist, said sleep is the golden chain that ties our health and human body together. And I think there's no better way to think about it than that. But there are a couple key things that happen when we sleep that enable us to adapt to stress. Number one, you probably heard of, like, you sleep in these 90 to 120 minute cycles, right? And what happens, there's non-REM sleep and there's REM sleep. Rapid eye movement sleep is when you dream. Non-REM, there's that deep sleep as part of that slow wave sleep. When you go to bed early at night, you have a pressure for slow wave sleep, meaning more of that 90 to 120 minutes is made up of this slow wave non-REM sleep. And during that time, growth hormone is released. Growth hormone enables tissue repair. Okay. Later at night, you have more REM sleep. And for us guys specifically, most of our testosterone is released during this time frame. Why is that important? Well, if you're cutting your sleep short, let's say you're only getting 6 hours of sleep, you're reducing your testosterone. And after the age of 30, we lose about 1% to 2% of our testosterone per year. Research demonstrates if you suppress your sleep to 5 hours a night for just 1 week, you reduce your testosterone level by 10 to 15%. That's like aging more than a decade in testosterone. Nobody wants that.
Wow.
So if you're not seeing the type of gains you expect to see in the weight room, it's probably, and you're not getting enough sleep, forget TRT. You need to focus on getting rest. Also, what happens when you sleep, especially during REM sleep, is there's a blocking of what's called the corticospinal pathways, and your tissues are literally under complete paralysis. So if you were to wake up, and this has happened to people before, they wake up during REM sleep and it is frightening because they can't move. And the reason for it'll freak you out. The reason for this is it allows for complete what's called myofibrillar or muscular regeneration, because your tissues just have to completely relax. And also, if you think about the crazy dreams that you have during REM sleep, it's like probably a protective mechanism. So that's one thing. That's like from a tissue perspective. Also, during the day, your stress systems are turned on, your HPA axis, your sympathetic nervous system, which is great. Makes you feel alert. You can do effortful things. But there are hormones like cortisol that are elevated, which is fine. You need an elevated spike in cortisol in the morning to get you going. But when you sleep at night, these systems are downregulated and cortisol is downregulated, which also allows your immune system to crank up so you can fight disease. And your immune system creates immunological memory. So it can remember foreign invaders. This is a really weird interaction that happens during slow wave sleep. And so you can fight off, infection better. Another really crazy thing that happens. So you have tissue regeneration that helps with adaptation. So if you're fitness perspective, if you want to get physically fit, you need sleep. We'll talk about how much in just a second. Another really cool thing, your body has something called a lymphatic system. It's kind of this metabolic drainage system, but your brain does not have a lymph system. About 15 years ago, neuroscientists discovered something called the glymphatic system. The glymphatic system is a system of what's called perivascular pathways. And at nighttime, it flushes out metabolic waste products from your brain, of which one of them is called beta amyloid. Beta amyloid is directly associated with neurocognitive diseases such as Alzheimer's disease. So what we've been seeing in the recent years is we've been seeing this massive increase in Alzheimer's and neurocognitive issues in our society. At the same time, sleep duration is plummeting. So do you think there's an association there? Absolutely. Because if your brain can literally not flush out the crap that's stuck in it, you're going to have problems. That's another reason why if you don't get enough sleep, you'll wake up in the morning, you'll feel just kind of groggy, your head's kind of foggy. So your brain literally is like, if your brain is not able to flush this out, you're going to have systemic inflammation. That's not something really good. It's going to, inhibit your ability to adapt to stress. The last thing I'd want to kind of double click on for a second is learning and memory consolidation. A lot of us work stressful jobs. We're working really hard to learn really quickly so we can get an edge, But what happens when you learn a new skill is the neurons that are used during that time are actually marked with different neurotransmitters. When you go to sleep at night, those neurons are actually strengthened. They actually get bigger. This is called synaptic homeostasis. And other ones are selectively weakened or they shrink. So your brain is like expanding and contracting at night. And the two scientists that identified this are named Tononi and Sorelli. They're actually at the University of Wisconsin. So they say sleep is the price your brain pays for plasticity. It's wild. So you can grind all day, work really, really hard to learn something, to upskill yourself. If you don't get enough sleep, it's not going to cement itself in your brain. There's some really cool research showing that, people that get enough sleep study 50% less on a subject, but review subject and get enough sleep at night, actually perform better on tests. MIT did a study on their undergraduate students, and they found that the students leading up to exams for the previous, I think it was 6 to 8 weeks, they got the most sleep and had the most consistent sleep schedule, outperformed their counterparts. And these are like the smartest kids on the planet, right?
I'm not surprised by that whatsoever. I'm just going to interject real quick because my friends used to make fun of me for this all the time. I would not study and just say, hey, I'm going to go to bed. Make sure I get my 9-10 hours of sleep prior to the exam. I would just take a notebook, go skim, and I'd outperform them 10 out of 10 times.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say don't study, but, do enough, but make like pulling an all-nighter. This is really crazy. They've actually done studies on what's called psychomotor vigilance, your ability to react and respond. And pulling an all-nighter is like being legally intoxicated.
Yeah.
You might as well just walk in with a 6-pack of beer.
I had somebody telling me the other day that he didn't sleep for I think he's like 40 hours. And he was driving, and he's like, no joke, I saw a dinosaur in the road.
Yeah, you'll hallucinate.
I was like, that's scary. He's like, I thought so too. I pulled over immediately and slept.
If you've ever talked to people that are Navy SEALs that go through Hell Week during BUDS, they sleep deprive them over, 5 or 6 days or whatever, and people will just be hallucinating. Not an experience that I want to have. I don't want to see a dinosaur in the road. But yeah, so there's a lot of really interesting things that are happening during sleep that you just can't biohack. Like, this isn't something you can biohack your way out of. You can't buy some special device that's going to like shock your brain or, this crazy stuff you see online. But there's 3 key behaviors that we need to nail down to get all these benefits. The first one is sleep duration. Duration matters. Research shows 7 to 9 hours is what adults need to thrive. And most of us overestimate our sleep about 30 to 60 minutes. So if you're like, I'm going to bed at 11, waking up at 6, and I'm getting 7 hours, you are not. You're getting like 6.5 hours. And if you're sitting here going, well, I do great on 5 hours, I can almost guarantee you do not have the genetic polymorphism that only like a fraction of 1% of the world has. You just don't even know what good is yet. And my doctoral work, we actually measured these slow cortical potentials in the brain with SEC football players. And we found these are guys under a lot of stress, game day, class, all this kind of stuff. And we could measure the millivolt potential of their brain. And the battery of the brain was optimized between 7 to 9 hours.
So I have a question on the flip side, right?
Yeah.
So we all know less is an issue. What about too much?
Great question. I don't get this one very often, but there is a U-shaped relationship, meaning like if you sleep less than 7 or more than 9, research shows you're at a higher risk for type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Now, the greater than 9 piece, to me, it may be associative. So, for instance, if you are very obese, you're probably not active. You're probably spending more of your time indoors, just kind of laying around. If you're an elite athlete, which most of the people listening are not, right? Including you and me, like training 4 hours a day, multiple times a day, because they're playing. Now, their sleep requirements may be higher. But there's this golden kind of range of 7 and 9. It was actually a really interesting. If you want to understand how a behavior impacts health, you study twins because they're so biologically similar. If one twin has a certain behavior, you can kind of see the outcome, the epigenetic outcome of what they're doing. There was a study of 21,000 twin pairs over 20 years. And they found that the twin that slept less than 7 hours a night had a 24% increase in all-cause mortality.
Wow.
They just died an earlier death. That's frightening, isn't it?
That's crazy. I don't know many people who get between that 7 and 9. And the reason I'm asking more about the more side of it, just to be transparent, is like, that's me. Like
you sleep more.
Oh, in college, I was sleeping 11 hours a night. And then coming now
as you are in your teen years, you need more, just like babies need more, right? They'll sleep 14, 16 hours and then it kind of begins to taper. But when you hit your 20s to,
I'm 33 and I'm still sleeping 9.5, 10 hours. And if I sleep under 9, I am cranky.
Well, you're an outlier then, and you're obviously fit. You're exercising, and you're under a lot of stress as a gym owner. So, but you could potentially have more of a need. But the average American sleeps 6.5 hours a night.
And I think it's because I'm on such the opposite extreme. That blows my mind. If I sleep 6.5 hours, as I've done before, like events, I'm just like, which way? I just don't want to talk to me.
Anthony, do you have kids?
No, not yet.
Okay, there you go. So no, I'm not shaming or anything like that, but all the parents out there are like, oh, I like, when the kids come, it's like everything goes out the window. And so what I don't want to do is shame people, because life is crazy and hard and difficult. So there are things like naps that are a wonderful tool that you can use. Even a short 20-minute nap significantly boosts cognitive performance, helps improve your mood appropriate behaviors. So you're not being just a jerk. And you don't even have to fall asleep. So like if you're a busy parent, and maybe you have a young child that's not sleeping through the night, a little 20-minute nap in the afternoon, you should give yourself the agency to do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Kids is always going to be the biggest outlier. And when I talk to you again in the next couple of years, I'm going to be like, Erik, I haven't slept a wink in a year. I totally get it. Before we get to the other two topics you wanted to talk about besides sleep duration, I'm just going to take a quick break from the word from our sponsor, and we will be right back, guys. For us, we know what it's like to feel unhealthy, depressed, and downright defeated. We want to show others there is a right way, and through fitness, you can do anything you set your mind to. Fitness can give you that motivation, confidence, energy you need to bridge that mental gap and prevent you from missing important life events. We understand it's about feeling better, living longer, and being good examples for our kids. We understand this because we live it. And for us, that's the redefined difference. Hey everybody, and welcome back. We have Erik here talking all about sleep and how maybe if you don't have young kids, you should probably get more than 4 or 5 hours a night. But I think another important topic, just kind of bring this in, coming from experience, I probably shouldn't admit this, but I've fallen asleep at the wheel.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, I did it once. Thank God my wife was in the car and she was able to like make sure I didn't hit a tree. But it's not what people think it is. And I think that's an important caveat coming from someone who thought, like, I used to always think, like, how do you fall asleep at the wheel? Like, you got to know that you're tired and you're not laying down. No, you literally think your dream is you driving.
Yes.
And you just shift into it. And in your head, you're still driving, but you ain't.
It's frightening. I almost had that happen one time. I was in Mississippi. I was coaching at Mississippi State, and I flew into Jackson, Mississippi late at night, and I had to drive up to Starkville, and I had to pull over. I'm like smacking myself and like rolling the window down. It can happen to anybody.
And it doesn't matter. Every trick in the book, I've heard it. Windows down, AC up, like whatever. It literally, I was doing all of that, and it's random points. But this was 8:30 at night. It's not even like it was 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
So just forewarning everybody, make sure you get enough sleep, because that is worst case scenario.
It happens, man. It happens. So do you want to hit up the other two?
Yeah, and I think the next one would be just out of curiosity, see if I can guess it. Consistency. Sleep consistency.
Yep. So there's duration, onset, and consistency. So we'll hit consistency. It's a really good point. Have you heard of social jet lag?
Yes.
Yeah. So essentially, if you've ever been jet lagged, it's a miserable experience. But most Americans are doing this themselves every single week. When you have one sleep routine during the week, let's say you go to bed at 11 and wake up at 6:30. I'm just throwing something out there. And then on the weekend, you're like, you know what? It's Friday, Saturday night. I'm going to stay up till midnight, 12:30, 1, whatever, and I'm going to sleep till 9. You get social jet lag. You remember Office Space? Somebody's got a case of the Mondays. Like, that's exactly what happens. Monday rolls around, you feel miserable, you have a hard time adjusting. What you need to do is make sure that your sleep routine is very consistent, and you kind of can have a flex window of about an hour, but as much as you can, try to be consistent. Now, live life. If Friday night is date night, have date night. but Saturday, Sunday, get back on schedule. Research demonstrates that being inconsistent with your sleep leads to increased risk of cardiometabolic disease, weight gain, all depression. It's wild. And so, duration 7 to 9 hours, being consistent with it. And I think one of the most under talked about variables is when you go to bed. I get the question all the time, is 12 to 8 the same as 10 to 6? It is not. There was a study with over 800,000 people done by the Broad Institute at MIT and Harvard and the University of Colorado. And they were using 800,000 people in the UK Biobank. They looked at 23andMe data, genetic data. They had sleep trackers. It was wild. First, they wanted to understand what was the impact of what's called your chronotype, or morning and evening. Interesting. Only about 9% of the population is truly an evening type. Why do a lot of people now say, oh, I feel alert in the evening. That's when I do my best work. Your stupid phone, right? Like, the phone is great, but we're, constantly stimulating ourselves. And so it's not so much the light from the phone that'll keep you up at night. It's if you're scrolling YouTube or Instagram or whatever, you get emotionally stimulated. I'm sure if you've ever been laying down in bed, you're like, oh, I just want to go check something. You read an email, you see something else, you're wide awake. Crap.
Last night.
There you go. I tried, and then, the first thing in the morning, you'll read something and wake you right up. So what the researchers found was this: by shifting your sleep onset back 1 hour. So let's say somebody was going to bed at 1 a.m. and they shifted it back to 12. They had a 23% reduction in risk of major depression. They shifted it back 1 more hour and it was a 40% reduction. So people that went to bed earlier and woke up earlier had significantly less risk of major depression. Now, why? You're like, okay, that's interesting. Why? I'm going to pause. Huh?
I can guess.
What is it?
Because it's going to lead into my next question if I'm right.
Go for it.
The setting and rising of the sun.
You got it. Viewing sunlight leads to a cascade of hormonal and neurological events that anchors your circadian clock. And there are two processes that control our our sleep-wake cycle. Number one is a homeostatic drive, which is biochemical in nature. It's a buildup of something called adenosine that makes you sleepy. Caffeine blocks adenosine receptors. That's why you feel more alert. And the second part is a circadian process, which circadian means about 24 hours. And there are what are called zeitgebers, or time givers, for their circadian clock. And light, temperature, humidity, food, and exercise or movement are anchors for this clock. Well, the strongest one is light. And specifically, you got to get very bright light. So the lights in your house typically aren't bright enough. So viewing the sun, the lux is so intense, but it directly stimulates something called through your eyes. Your eyes bring in this signal, and it stimulates something called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's a bundle of nerves that sits above the roof of your mouth. That stimulates or sends a signal to every cell in your body that it's time to wake up. It does that by increasing body temperature and spiking cortisol, which I mentioned earlier. Great. This makes you more alert. Also, as you expose yourself to more sunlight during the day, I recently had Dr. Sachin Panda on my podcast, and he's a researcher at the Salk Institute. We've always known that early morning sunlight viewing impacts melatonin production later in the day, which is the sleepy hormone. But they're now finding that there's actually melatonin receptors in your skin. And so, like, the more sunlight exposure you get during the day, the more melatonin that's released at night. So not all of us have the luxury of just like working outside all the time. So like, just, I work at home. I have an office. Take a 5-minute break every couple hours and go outside, go for a quick walk, kind of take a little break, get more sunlight exposure. This will help you fall asleep at night. So you nailed it. But that is, if people would just get more natural light exposure, specifically in the morning, it dramatically impacts mental health.
And I'm going to follow up with the question I wanted to ask, because this is a tough one for you. I think I know the answer, but I just want to ask you time of year relative to how much sleep you're getting. What I mean by that is obviously in the summer months, we get more sunlight, less night, especially the more north or south you go from the equator. So, coming from New York, I always sleep less in the summer and sleep more in the winter.
That's
And it's
typical.
it's significant. So is that related to our bodies being natural to knowing that when the sun's down, we need to sleep? And during the winter months, we don't want to exert as much energy. So we sleep more as opposed to in the summer months, that's when we go out, hunter, gather, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, there's a relationship to all of this. Also, if you're not getting as much sun exposure, you're not feeling as alert and awake and you're not as active. And so it's kind of all bundled together, but you're exactly right. The more sun exposure, people are more active during the summer, during the winter, it's more cloudy, more hazy. They're not going out as much side also because of environmental constraints, specifically if you live up in the north. And so people do what? They sleep more. And so this is, a common biological phenomenon, but, you know, seasonal mood affect disorder is real. And if you live in an area where it's cloudy, you still need to go outside. So if you're in New York, you're in Seattle, Washington, you're in wherever, I don't care if it's sub-zero. I lived in a place where we have blizzards. I would still get my butt up in the morning and go stand on the porch with my jacket on, and I felt better. You just feel better. Um, it's very interesting too. If you look at coffee consumption, the countries that consume the most coffee per person in the world are like Finland, Sweden, Denmark. Canada is the only one in North America. Why? They're all up north. They don't have as much sunlight. So it's kind of this natural instinct to go get another cup of coffee is a neurostimulant.
Yeah, it's okay. So yeah, pretty much everything I was going with in that direction is exactly right, which is pretty interesting. I want to get to the last one.
Sure.
Is so tell us a little bit about what the third one is and how it affects.
Oh, we did. We talked about duration, onset, and consistency.
Onset. Just as a
Oh,
reminder,
yeah.
like
So you want to make sure that you're in bed um, before midnight. Okay. Ideally, the best ideal duration to be asleep is before midnight. 10 to 11 is optimal. But if you're up late, but going to bed past midnight is not a good idea. It's going to dramatically impact when you wake up, and it's going to impact your mood and depression. So, like, if you were to create an optimal scenario, and look, life is not optimal, but you should try to kind of stay in this bucket of 7 to 9 hours, asleep before midnight, and be consistent. And let's say like all three are completely out of whack right now. Don't try to change everything at once because it's going to be really hard. Maybe just start moving your onset back 15 minutes. Um, I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit later, but the app we built, AIM7, our algorithms actually do this. We created a really sophisticated model to assess where people's sleep is, and then it kind of like make little nudges to kind of move them into the right time frame. Because if you try to change everything at once with your fitness, with your nutrition, it's small micro changes consistently over time will yield long-term results.
And I'm just going to ask you some quick fire questions. I think
Sure.
it's important, and we'll talk about your app a little bit more. But blue light has been a huge topic of concern. You briefly mentioned it before, is it does stimulate the eyes, but if you look at something related to watching a movie at night, which is very common nowadays, is that something you should move up earlier, or you think just whatever?
It's more just light in general. So as the sun goes down, just try dimming the lights in your house. Specifically really bright overhead lights. Lamps are much better. Um, the movie thing, like I wouldn't recommend binging Netflix every night, but enjoy yourself on the weekend and have watch a show or something. But, you know, during the week specifically, right? Like we want to try to be good for our jobs. We want to, I would think about when the sun goes down is a time to start dialing it back with light and cognitive stimulation, and try to do things that are just relaxing for you. If a TV show does relax you, that's fine. Just make sure the rest of the house is starting to get darker and darker and darker.
So then the next question would be blackout curtains. See or no?
Yes, great idea. Your bedroom, from a hygiene perspective, what they call sleep hygiene, should be cold, dark, and quiet like a cave. So blackout curtains are wonderful because if light is an alerting signal in the morning, it's an alerting signal in the evening. Turn your cell phone over. Do not fall asleep with the TV on. That can have detrimental impacts on your health. Cool your room down because it's gonna during night when you go to sleep, your body temperature lowers. This is going to help usher you into a lower body temperature quickly. A warm shower also does this because you kind of have a reactive process where your body tries to cool itself pretty quickly, and that'll lower your body temperature as well. And then you want to keep it quiet. Now, if you live in the city, a white noise maker may be helpful or beneficial.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Now, how would your app kind of relate to help keeping people on track? You said you're measuring all these different metrics to help nudge them into that little where you want to be. So what kind of reminders and stuff how could people find out more about AIM-7?
Yeah, so AIM-7, we're solving the problem that, there's over 125 million Americans that have these wearables right now because they want to improve their health behavior, but the devices just say, hey, you walked 7,000 steps or slept 6 hours. Like, great. Thanks. Like, what exactly do I do? So we analyze your data. And then for mind, body, and recovery, we're like, oh, here's the specific area that you could focus on. Then we provide you a very targeted goal. Our algorithms will give you a very specific recommendation for you, and they change slowly over time. And then we wrap that in like a masterclass library of over 100 pieces of content from some of the world's leading experts in sports psychology, human performance. Like I've gone out and curated the best in the world, and it's all done in little vignettes of 2 minutes or less for busy people. So we built an app that makes all this actionable for busy people. It doesn't take the place of your personal trainer. It doesn't take the place. What it does is it makes all that 10x better. So we actually have something in the app we call it fluid and flexible modeling, which we pioneered the technology behind. But we can give you the precise type, intensity, and duration of exercise that your body is ready to adapt to today. Have we demonstrated this rapidly improves fitness, prevents burnout and injuries, and it would sit right underneath whatever you want to do. So if you like to get on the elliptical, AIM-7 would be like, this is how hard you should go and the exact heart rate zone you should go in. You do a functional strength training class. So you can still go do all the things you love. It's just a recommendation layer that sits underneath it.
That's pretty cool.
Thank you.
And it could help program. Is it something you wear every day? Like while you sleep or
if you have an Apple Watch, a Garmin, a Whoop, an Aura, like we suck in all that data. So it's not a wearable. It's an app. It sucks all that information in. If you do mindfulness, it makes the health data and your wearable useful. And so it's, we do recommend wearing your wearable to sleep so we can measure sleep. If you forget to, we have little stuff in there, but we'll look at mind, body, and recovery and be like, oh, you're crushing it with sleep. Your exercise is on point, but you're not doing anything for your mental fitness. And then we'll help you in that area and give you, if your mood's down, we'll send you a specific intervention to help change your mood in the moment. You're stressed out, we'll give you a specific breathwork tool.
I love that. It kind of brings everything full focused instead of how many steps did I get today? So, if you go back like 10 episodes, you can see how many steps in a day you get. And it's not as easy of a science as you think it is. But Erik, let's wrap this up. So I'm going to ask you the final two questions I ask everybody. If you were to summarize this episode in 1 or 2 sentences, what would be your take-home message?
Get more sleep to adapt to stress.
Get more sleep to adapt to stress. Love it. And then the second question, how can people find you, get a hold of you, give us all that stuff?
Yeah. So at Erik Korem on any of the major social media platforms. I do have a podcast called The Blueprint, short 15-minute episodes that distills cutting-edge science, leadership, and life skills for busy people. And if you're interested in AIM-7, AIM7.com. We have a waiting list of about 3,000 people. If you mention that you heard us on the show, we'll move you right to the top of the list as kind of a benefit for your audience.
I love it. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for guys for joining us on this week's episode of Health and Fitness Redefined. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button and join us next week as we dive deeper into this ever-changing field. And remember, fitness is medicine. Until next time.